Okay, next question is from Alexis. And Alexis asks, I understand that some people are skeptical about chiropractic. What inspired you to go into the field? What do you suggest needs to be done in order to change the attitude of skepticism? Well, some people are skeptical about chiropractic. It's gotten a lot better over the last 40 years since I went to chiropractic college. I have a lot of good relationships with local medical doctors. They refer patients to me. I refer patients back to them. I only take care of people with biomechanical problems. And those are problems that have a biomechanical root to them as opposed to a disease process. Diseases, if I think a person has a disease, I'll send them out to a medical doctor, send them usually back to their primary and have them do a blood test or whatever they need to do. But the skepticism, I think, is partly political because we are in competition with some other practitioners. But also, chiropractic, we have to take the blame for some of it because going back to 1895, it started with Daniel David Palmer, who started the chiropractic profession in 1895. And his first patient was not a person with any kind of back or neck pain. It was a deaf man who had been deaf for 17 years. And this is the way the story goes. I wasn't there. I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it's true, but it started the profession. So he had Harvey Lillard was the name of the first chiropractic patient. He was a Jamaican janitor, and he worked in Dr. Palmer's building. And Dr. Palmer was back in those days, they had magnetic healers. It's very similar to some of the new age things that go on now, but I guess magnetic healing is closest to Reiki, if you ever heard of Reiki, where it's a laying on of hands. And that's what he did. He had a practice of that back in 1895. But his janitor said, his janitor was deaf. And apparently 17 years prior to Dr. Palmer's adjustment, first chiropractic adjustment, he said he felt something pop somewhere in his spine. So according to Palmer, he said, I figured that, if something popped out, we can pop it back in. So he examined his spine. And I remember his terminology was, I found a vertebra displaced in relation to its fellows, so I racked it back into place. So I don't know what that was like. But apparently, Harvey Lillard's hearing came back. Now, it's interesting because back in the 1980s, when I practiced up in New York City, one of my colleagues who practiced down the street from me, he called me up all excited and he said, you don't believe what just happened in my office. And he had a patient. She had neck pain. He laid her down. He did an adjustment. She sat bolt upright and grabbed her neck and said, oh my God, what did you do? And he got scared. He said, what do you mean? What's wrong? And she said, I haven't been able to hear out of this ear for like 3 years. And all of a sudden I can hear again. Now, there's also a story that is, you can look it up on YouTube. It was on the news in some Midwestern city. A woman came into a chiropractor's office, brought her fiance with her. Now, her fiance was blind in one eye. And so the chiropractor was talking. He said, well, why don't you give me an adjustment? The chiropractor examined him, found he had a problem up in his upper neck. He adjusted him. He said when he went home, his eyes started watering. The blind eye just started watering. And he said he went home, it continued to water, and then he realized that he had closed the other eye and he could see. So now, we don't claim, modern chiropractors don't claim to cure deafness or cure blindness, but these are documented cases of this actually happening in chiropractic offices. This one made the news, a particular one. With my friend, it didn't. Every once in a while, you'll read about somebody who falls, a blind man who falls down the steps and all of a sudden can see. So there's a lot of neurology that we don't understand. You would think in the year 2020 that we understand everything there is to understand about the human body. I mean, we've done the genome project. We know about all the human genes. But for instance, back when I was in chiropractic school over 40 years ago, all the textbooks said that you cannot have back pain that originates in the disc because there are no nerve endings in the disc. The same textbooks now say that 80% of back pain comes from the disc. They found that the outer 1/3 of the disc is full of these nociceptors. So I guess nobody was looking. I don't know what the story is, but there's a lot that needs to be explained. So going back to 1895, now Daniel David Palmer, he thinks he has a cure for deafness. So he, back then you put an ad in the paper and you let people know. And he found he really didn't have a cure for deafness because he wasn't helping most people who were deaf, because obviously there are a lot of causes for deafness. But he was lucky enough to find this one patient, his first one, where it was called cervicogenic deafness. It came from somewhere in the neck. So he had another patient. His second success was a man who had angina pain. And the angina pain went away with the chiropractic adjustments. Now Palmer decides he's got a cure for everything. Now, further on, there's a question about osteopathy and chiropractic. Now, A.T. Stills back in 1874 discovered or came up with the osteopathic profession. And osteopaths originally would do manipulation in order to affect the circulation. He said the artery is king. I believe that was his quote, Dr. Stills. So he started the osteopathic profession 21 years before chiropractic, claiming pretty much the same thing, that he could manipulate the spine and affect problems anywhere in the body. Palmer said he could adjust the spine and affect problems anywhere in the body, but because of the nervous system, which actually makes more sense. I mean, the arteries and the circulatory system would be secondary to the nervous system, because the nervous system is controlling the circulatory system. So, but I have up in my attic, I have a book. At 1910, Dr. Palmer wrote this book. And if you look at the book, it's kind of funny to look at now, because he said things like, well, if a patient has cholera, look for something like, I'll just make up a vertebra, but it was very specific. It's the third thoracic vertebra to the right, move it back to the left, and the cholera will go away. Well, obviously, it's absurd, but that's what he believed. That was his theory. His son, B.J. Palmer, who really got the practice of chiropractic going back in the 19-teens and 20s and 30s, he said that he could cure anything. Basically, one of his quotes was he could empty the prisons, the mental asylums, and the hospitals by using chiropractic adjustments. So these big, bold, brash statements, I think, are one of the reasons it still lingers today, like 50, 70, 80 years later. And there are chiropractors still who claim chiropractic as sort of a panacea. But that's not really the core belief of the profession. We believe that most of our patients are going to have all of our patients have biomechanical problems that we try to normalize using chiropractic adjustments. Sometimes, and I've had it happen in my practice, you'll see things that you can't really explain, but neurologically they make sense. But we'll get into that. But basically, the skepticism goes way back to the origins of chiropractic. And in fact, in the 1960s, somebody must have been a disgruntled employee of the American Medical Association, because this employee left several boxes full of files on the doorstep of the American Chiropractic Association. They're both in Washington, D.C. And this showed that there was a concerted effort to destroy the chiropractic profession by the American Medical Association. And for I think it was 3 years or 4 years back in the early 60s, they dedicated $1 million a year, which was a lot of money back in the early 60s, in order to basically badmouth chiropractic and get it out there. So there's been some self-inflicted injury from chiropractic, and then there's been pressure from the outside on chiropractic. By the way, the Dr. Wilk sued the American Medical Association and a few hundred medical associations around the country for based on those files. And the chiropractic profession actually won. He didn't win money, but he won the point. And that was that they were trying to repress the chiropractic profession, and which was deleterious to the public interest. And he won the case, and there were settlements made. Like for instance, there was a doctor who had what's called the Kentuckiana Institute in Kentucky, and she hired medical doctors to take care of these disabled children. She would work. It was a charitable. It was a nonprofit. She would work on these children with different kinds of disabilities using chiropractic techniques, but she wanted a medical doctor on her staff in order to take care of any medical problems that the children had. And they found that their licenses were in trouble for working at Kentuckiana. So this is a lot of crazy things that have gone on over the years. Thankfully, for the good of the patients, this is much. It's still lingering, and you can still get the medical doctors who will say, well, mostly it has to do with ignorance because they don't understand exactly what we do. Plus, it's not part of their protocol. The protocols of the medical profession are, you go there with a problem, your medical doctor will give you medications, prescribe rest, maybe some exercises. If that doesn't work, send you to an orthopedist, who will often send you to a physical therapist, etc. So that's their whole protocol. And usually it's the patients that say to their doctors, I want to see a chiropractor. And a lot of times now, the patients will say to me, oh, my doctor said that was a good idea to come and see you. So the skepticism with the advent of more research, there's a lot of research that backs up what we do. We don't have specific research like we would like to have about these things, like effects on different organ systems by doing manipulation. Research is expensive, and it's, that's not where when you can write your grants, but the money often is going to go, much more often is going to go toward cancer research and heart disease and the things that have a lot of patients. Okay, I'm going to stop this. A lot of times the research will go to other problems that are considered more pressing, like cancer and heart disease, etc. So hopefully, as the years go on, we can have more and more research, and there'll be less and less skepticism about chiropractic. And there was a second question. What was the most interesting case you've encountered, and why, and how did I deal with it? I guess it was a woman that's going back into that same subject. It was a young woman. She was about 25. She hadn't had her menstrual cycle was messed up. She hadn't had her period in about 3 years, which I didn't know at the time. She had a low back problem, and I adjusted her low back. And by adjusting her low back over time, it was a very chronic problem that she had. So it took weeks. I've been working on her. And one day she came in and said, could this have any effect on my menstrual cycle? I said, well, neurologically, the neuroanatomy is there. I mean, the area I've been adjusting, there are nerve roots that eventually go to the sex organs, but what's going on? And she told me that she was starting to get her period, and then she told me the whole story. She hadn't had her period in 2 or 3 years. And so I started working on her, and I probably worked on her for about 6 months. What we do is, and I'll get into this because there are questions about it, but we taper off the treatments as the patient improves. But she had her period for like 6 months, and it was normal. And then she went away. She was gone for about a year or so. She came back to me. I asked her about it. She said that her periods had continued for about 4 months or so. I forget, this is like 30 years ago. And she said they'd gone away, and she hadn't had her period again for 6 or 8 months. Started working on her again. Period came back again. So obviously, I thought that was very interesting because there was one case where I could see, and there's a difference between anecdotal evidence and clinical experience. And this was a case clinically where we adjusted her, periods came back without the adjustments, they went away again, started the adjustments, they came back again. It's one patient, so it's not a great sample, but it just showed that there is this correlation between the adjustments and the organ problems that are other than low back or neck pain or middle back pain.